When she found the crumpled note on the kitchen floor, she never imagined a single word could change her life forever. The last nanny had fled in panic, leaving behind only a warning that echoed like a dark prophecy. The front door slammed so hard, the crystal chandelier in the foyer trembled, and Sarah Mitchell knew instantly that another nanny had given up. She watched from her car as the woman practically ran down the marble steps, her designer heels clicking frantically against stone, not even bothering to collect the expensive luggage she'd brought just 3 days ago. A crumpled piece of paper fluttered from her hand onto the perfectly manicured lawn. Sarah turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. Her last chance at financial stability, her only shot at proving herself in a world that seemed designed to keep people like her on the outside looking in. She smoothed down her simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, and tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. The note on the lawn read simply, "Impossible. Good luck." Mrs. Hartford, the estate's head housekeeper, appeared at the door like a stern ghost in grey wool. Her silver hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her already severe features. She'd been running this household for 20 years, and her expression made it clear she didn't expect Sarah to last 20 minutes. "You must be the new girl," Mrs. Hartford said, looking Sarah up and down with obvious disapproval. "I suppose you think you can handle what 7 other women couldn't." Sarah lifted her chin. Back home in rural Tennessee, her grandmother had taught her that confidence wasn't about having all the answers. It was about believing you could find them. "I'm here to try, ma'am." The mansion loomed before her, like something from a magazine she couldn't afford to buy. Marble columns, pristine windows that sparkled in the autumn sun, and landscaping so perfect it looked painted. This was the home of Marcus Blackstone, one of the wealthiest men in America, a business empire builder whose name appeared in Forbes as regularly as the weather forecast. "Mr. Blackstone is in Singapore," Mrs. Hartford said curtly, leading Sarah through hallways lined with artwork worth more than most people's houses. "He won't be back for 2 weeks. You'll have full responsibility for Master Dillon during that time. If you survive that long." The way she said it sent a chill down Sarah's spine. What exactly was she walking into? They climbed a grand staircase, past family portraits that seemed to watch with judgmental eyes. Sarah noticed something interesting. There were gaps on the walls, lighter patches where other pictures had once hung. Someone had been carefully removed from this family's visual history. "Dillon," Mrs. Hartford called sharply. "Come meet your new nanny. And please try not to terrorize this one before dinner." Sarah heard it before she saw anything, a crash that sounded like expensive dishware meeting an expensive floor. Then laughter. Not the sweet giggle of a normal 8-year-old, but something wilder, almost manic. The boy who appeared at the top of the stairs was beautiful in the way only children of remarkable genetics could be. Dark hair that curled slightly at the edges, eyes the color of storm clouds, and skin that had never known want or worry. But there was something in those eyes that made Sarah's heart ache immediately. A loneliness so deep, it seemed to echo through the cavernous house. "Another one?" Dillon said, looking down at Sarah with the kind of cool assessment that belonged on a much older face. "How long do you think you'll last? The record is 6 days. I'm betting 3. Mrs. Hartford's mouth tightened. Dillon Blackstone apologized this instant, but Sarah held up her hand. She'd grown up with 3 younger brothers and more cousins than she could count. She recognized the challenge in Dillon's voice, but also something else. A test. This wasn't a cruel child. This was a scared one, wearing cruelty like armor. 3 days, Sarah said, settling her hands on her hips. That's insulting. I was planning on at least a week before you drove me completely crazy. For just a second, Dillon's mask slipped. Surprise flickered across his features before the defiant expression snapped back into place. You'll see, he said, but there was less venom in it now. More curiosity. Mrs. Hartford showed Sarah to her room, a suite more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever slept, with a view of gardens that stretched toward mountains in the distance. But she barely noticed the Egyptian cotton sheets or the marble bathroom. Her mind was already working, trying to solve the puzzle of Dillon Blackstone. That first night, she lay awake, listening. The house was too quiet, too still. Back home, nights were filled with the sounds of family. Snoring, settling floorboards, the occasional slam of a screen door. Here, Silence pressed against her eardrums like cotton. But around midnight, she heard something else. Soft footsteps in the hallway. Then the faint sound of crying, quickly muffled. Sarah slipped from her room and followed the sound. Dylan's door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see him sitting on his enormous bed, arms wrapped around his knees, trying desperately not to make noise as tears slipped down his cheeks. Her heart broke a little more. She'd seen this before with her youngest brother after their father died. The way grief could twist itself into anger, especially in children who didn't have words for the pain they carried. She didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, she retreated to her room and made a plan. The next morning, Dylan appeared for breakfast in what was clearly a calculated outfit designed for maximum mess potential. Finger paint smeared on his shirt, mud somehow already on his shoes, despite not having been outside yet. Mrs. Hartford's lips disappeared entirely into a thin line of disapproval. "I see we're starting the day with artistic expression," Sarah said mildly, settling into the chair beside him instead of across from him like the other nannies had apparently done. "What did you paint?" Dylan blinked, clearly expecting anger or exasperation. It's supposed to be a dragon," he mumbled. "Can I see it?" The question seemed to shock him. "You want to see it?" "Of course. I love dragons. Back home, my grandmother told me stories about dragons every night. Did you know that in some cultures, dragons aren't scary at all? They're protectors, guardians of treasure and wisdom." Something shifted in Dylan's face. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of interest. After breakfast, instead of the structured lessons the previous nannies had apparently attempted, Sarah suggested they explore the house. "I've never been anywhere this big," she admitted honestly. "I bet you know all the best hiding spots." And Dylan did. He led her through secret passages that connected different wings, showed her the library that had a ladder on wheels for reaching the highest shelves, took her to a conservatory filled with exotic plants that seemed to belong in another world entirely. "My mum loved this room," he said quietly, as they stood among the orchids and ferns. Sarah's breath caught. There it was, the first crack in his armor. "Tell me about her," she said softly. But Dylan's face immediately shuttered closed again. "She's gone. That's all. Gone. Not dead." Sarah would have heard about that. Gone meant something else entirely. Something that might explain the missing pictures and the careful way Mrs. Hartford avoided certain topics. The first real test came that afternoon. Dylan announced he was going to build a fort in the living room and began systematically removing every cushion from every piece of furniture. When Sarah didn't stop him, he grew bolder, dragging in chairs from the dining room. Mrs. Hartford appeared like an avenging angel. "What is the meaning of this disaster?" "We're building a fort," Sarah said calmly before Dylan could answer. "It's excellent engineering practice. Dylan, show Mrs. Hartford how you figured out the angles for the roof structure." The boy's eyes widened. None of his previous nannies had ever defended him, especially not to Mrs. Hartford, and suddenly he was explaining his construction process with an intelligence that was startling in its sophistication. Mrs. Hartford said after listening to his detailed explanation. "Well, I suppose learning can take many forms, but this furniture is antique, Master Dylan. Perhaps we could use the cushions from the family room instead?" It was the first compromise Sarah had seen from the stern housekeeper, and Dylan seemed just as surprised by it. That evening, as they cleaned up their fort, Dylan asked quietly, "Why didn't you get mad?" "About what?" "The mess, the cushions. All the other nannies got mad." Sarah considered her words carefully. "Back home, we believe that sometimes you have to make a mess to build something beautiful. And you built something pretty amazing today. It was just a stupid fort." "No," she said firmly, "it wasn't. You solved engineering problems, you used spatial reasoning, and you created something that made you happy. That's not stupid. That's brilliant." For the first time since she'd arrived, Dylan smiled. Really smiled. Not the sharp-edged thing he'd been wielding like a weapon. But just as Sarah began to hope she was making progress, Mrs. Hartford knocked on the doorframe. "Miss Mitchell, there's a phone call for you, your mother." Sarah's stomach dropped. Her mother never called unless something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Dylan, can you start getting ready for bed? I'll be right back to check on you." The phone call confirmed her worst fears. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents' divorce, who had taught her everything about patience and love and seeing the best in people, had been rushed to the hospital. Heart attack. The doctors weren't sure she would make it through the night. Sarah stood in the marble hallway, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles went white, trying not to fall apart. She needed to go home, right now. But if she left, she'd lose this job, and without it she couldn't help with her grandmother's medical bills or support her younger brother's college expenses. "Bad news?" Mrs. Hartford asked, and for the first time there was something almost like kindness in her voice. "My grandmother," Sarah managed. She might not..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Mrs. Hartford surprised her by placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Family first, dear. Always family first. I'll watch over Dylan until you return." But as Sarah headed toward the stairs, she heard it, the sound that had been haunting her dreams since she'd arrived. Dylan was crying again, but this time he wasn't trying to hide it. She found him sitting by his bedroom window, tears streaming down his face. "You're leaving too," he said without looking at her. "Just like everyone else." The accusation hit her like a physical blow. In the space of a day, this child had begun to trust her, and now she was about to shatter that trust just like all the others. "Dylan, my mum said she'd come back too. She said she just needed some time. That was 8 months ago. 8 months. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The missing pictures, the careful silences, the way Dylan tested every adult who entered his life. "I have to go," she said honestly. "My grandmother is very sick and she needs me. But Dylan, I want you to listen to me carefully." He finally looked at her, his storm gray eyes swimming with tears. "I'm coming back. I promise you I am coming back. This is not goodbye. This is see you soon. Can you believe me? Can you trust me that much?" Dylan studied her face for a long moment. "How do I know you're not lying like she did?" Sarah pulled her grandmother's silver locket from around her neck, the only valuable thing she owned, the only thing connecting her to the woman who had loved her unconditionally. She placed it gently in Dylan's small hands. "Because I'm leaving this with you. This belonged to my grandmother, and it's the most important thing I own. I would never leave it behind unless I was absolutely certain I was coming back for it." Dylan's fingers closed around the locket. What if she dies? The question was so raw, so honest, that Sarah had to blink back her own tears. "Then I'll need you to help me remember all the good things about her, and you'll need me to help you remember that even when people leave, the love doesn't go anywhere. It stays right here." She placed her hand gently over his heart. For a moment they sat in silence. Then Dylan whispered, "How long?" 3 days, maybe 4. Mrs. Hartford will take good care of you." "Mrs. Hartford doesn't know about the dragons." Despite everything, Sarah smiled. "Then you'll have to teach her." As she packed her few belongings, Sarah tried not to think about the statistics. 7 nannies in 6 months. All of them had left voluntarily, driven away by a child's pain that manifested as defiance. But none of them had understood what she was beginning to see. Dylan wasn't trying to drive people away because he was cruel. He was trying to control the inevitable abandonment by making it happen on his terms. Mrs. Hartford drove her to the airport, and as they pulled away from the mansion, Sarah saw a small figure in an upstairs window, holding something that caught the light, her grandmother's locket. "He's not a bad child," Mrs. Hartford said quietly as they drove through the Tennessee mountains toward the airport. "He's just broken. His mother left right after his 7th birthday. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone one morning while he was at school." "Where did she go?" "California. She's living with some artist now, according to the private investigator Mr. Blackstone hired. She sends birthday cards, but she's never asked to see Dylan. Not once." Sarah felt sick. What kind of mother abandoned her child so completely? "And his father? Mr. Blackstone loves that boy more than his own life," Mrs. Hartford said fiercely, "but he doesn't know how to help him. Every time he tries to get close, Dylan pulls away. And Mr. Blackstone, he's not good with emotional things. He solves problems with money and logic. But this isn't that kind of problem." At the airport, Mrs. Hartford surprised Sarah again. "You will come back, won't you? He's been different since you arrived. Calmer. More like the child he used to be. I promised him I would." "Good. That boy has had enough broken promises to last a lifetime." The flight to Tennessee felt endless. Sarah stared out the window at clouds that looked like cotton balls against blue sky and tried not to think about what she was risking. If her grandmother died, she'd need to stay for the funeral and help settle affairs. If she stayed too long, would Dylan think she'd broken her promise too? Would Marcus Blackstone fire her for abandoning his son during a crisis? But as the plane began its descent into Nashville, Sarah realized something that surprised her. She wasn't just worried about losing her job. She was worried about losing Dylan. Somewhere in the space of 36 hours, that angry, brilliant, heartbroken little boy had worked his way into her heart. And that terrified her almost as much as losing her grandmother. Because the one thing Sarah had learned from watching her parents' bitter divorce, from seeing her mother struggle as a single parent, from growing up poor in a world that valued wealth above all else, was that caring too much about people who could disappear from your life was the fastest way to get your heart shattered. But as the wheels touched down on Tennessee soil, Sarah Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. Some risks were worth taking, some hearts were worth the chance of breaking, and some promises were worth keeping, no matter what it cost. The taxi pulled into the circular driveway at exactly 4:17 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, 2 hours earlier than Sarah had promised Dylan she would return. Her grandmother was alive, weak but stable, and Sarah had spent 3 sleepless nights by her hospital bed, holding her hand and listening to stories about love and loss and the importance of keeping promises to children who had been disappointed too many times. As she paid the driver, Sarah saw the front door fly open and a small figure come racing down the marble steps. Dylan launched himself into her arms with such force that they both nearly tumbled backward, and she felt something wet against her shoulder. "You came back," he whispered, his voice thick with tears he was trying hard not to shed. "You actually came back." "I told you I would," Sarah said, smoothing his dark hair as he clung to her. "I always keep my promises." He pulled back just enough to press her grandmother's locket into her palm, but his fingers lingered on hers for a moment. "Is she okay, your grandmother?" "She's going to be fine, and she can't wait to meet you someday." For the first time since she'd known him, Dylan smiled without any shadows hiding behind it. Mrs. Hartford appeared in the doorway, and Sarah was shocked to see something that looked almost like relief cross the older woman's stern features. "Welcome back, Miss Mitchell. Master Dylan has been challenging these past few days." "I haven't been that bad," Dylan protested, but the pink in his cheeks suggested otherwise. "Yesterday he decided to reorganize the library," Mrs. Hartford continued dryly. "By color instead of by subject. It took the staff 4 hours to put everything back." "I thought it looked better," Dylan mumbled. Sarah bit back a smile. "I'm sure it did. Maybe we can find a compromise that makes everyone happy." As they walked back toward the house, Dylan chattering excitedly about everything that had happened while she was gone, Sarah noticed something different about the mansion. It felt less like a museum and more like a home. Someone had moved fresh flowers into the foyer, and she could smell something delicious coming from the kitchen. "Mrs. Hartford has been cooking," Dylan explained, catching her curious look. "Real food, not just the fancy stuff the caterers usually bring. She made me help yesterday. I'm pretty good at stirring." Sarah glanced at the housekeeper, who was trying very hard to look stern and failing. "Learning to cook is an excellent skill," Sarah said diplomatically. "The boy has natural talent," Mrs. Hartford admitted grudgingly, "though his measuring techniques need work." That evening, as Sarah tucked Dylan into bed, he asked the question she'd been dreading. "When is my dad coming home?" "Soon, I think. Why?" Dylan picked at his blanket, not meeting her eyes. "What if he doesn't like you? What if he fires you, like he fired Miss Peterson?" Sarah had heard about Miss Peterson, the nanny who'd lasted 6 days and apparently tried to implement a military-style discipline system that had resulted in Dylan barricading himself in his room for an entire afternoon. "Would that scare you?" "If he fired me?" "Yes," Dylan whispered. "Because then I'd be alone again." "Dylan, look at me." Sarah waited until his storm-gray eyes met hers. "You are not alone. Even if something happened and I couldn't be your nanny anymore, which I don't think will happen, you would still have Mrs. Hartford and your father and me. People who care about you don't just disappear because job titles change. But my mom, your mom made her own choices, and those choices were wrong. They had nothing to do with you and everything to do with her own problems. You are lovable, Dylan Blackstone. You are worth staying for." She saw him struggle with that concept, and her heart ached for him. How did you convince a 7-year-old that he wasn't the reason his mother had abandoned him? The call came at 2 a.m. on Saturday morning. Marcus Blackstone was flying back from Singapore a week early, and he would be home by Sunday evening. Mrs. Hartford delivered this news with the kind of careful neutrality that suggested she was worried about Sarah's reaction. "He's going to want to see immediate improvement," Mrs. Hartford warned over breakfast. "Mr. Blackstone is results-oriented. He expects problems to be solved efficiently." "Dylan isn't a problem to be solved," Sarah said quietly. "He's a child who needs patience and understanding." "Yes. Well," Mrs. Hartford sighed, "you might want to prepare some examples of his progress. Mr. Blackstone appreciates concrete evidence." Sarah spent that Saturday watching Dylan more carefully, and what she saw amazed her. In just the few days she'd been gone, he'd changed. He was calmer, more cooperative. When he helped Mrs. Hartford in the kitchen, he followed directions without argument. When they worked on his reading, he focused for longer periods. And most remarkably, he'd been sleeping through the night. No more midnight crying sessions that broke Sarah's heart. But she also noticed something else. Dylan was performing. Every action seemed calculated to please, to prove he was worthy of staying. It was heartbreaking and concerning at the same time. "Dylan," she said as they sat in the conservatory among his mother's beloved plants, "you know you don't have to be perfect for people to love you, right?" He looked up from the book he'd been reading, a thick volume about dragons that was definitely above his grade level, but that he was devouring with passionate intensity. "If I'm good enough, maybe people will stay," he said simply. "Oh, sweetheart." Sarah set down her own book and moved closer to him on the wicker bench. "That's not how love works. Real love doesn't have conditions. You don't have to earn it by being perfect." Then why did she leave? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah had been dreading it, but she'd also been preparing for it. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know your mum, and I don't know what was happening in her heart when she made that choice. But I know it wasn't because you weren't good enough. Sometimes grown-ups make terrible decisions for reasons that have nothing to do with their children. But if I had been better..." "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "Dylan, listen to me. You could have been the most perfect child in the history of the world, and she still might have made the same choice, because her leaving was about her problems, not about you." She watched him process this, his young mind working through concepts that even adults struggled with. "My dad thinks it's his fault," Dylan said quietly. Sarah's breath caught. "What makes you say that?" "I heard him on the phone once talking to Uncle Robert. He said maybe if he'd been home more, maybe if he'd paid more attention." Dylan's voice trailed off. Sarah felt a surge of understanding for Marcus Blackstone that surprised her. A man drowning in his own guilt, trying to build an empire while his son fell apart, not knowing how to fix either problem. "Your dad loves you very much," she said carefully. "Then why is he never here?" It was a fair question, and Sarah didn't have a good answer for it. Sunday evening arrived too quickly. Sarah spent the afternoon helping Dylan organize his room and prepare for his father's return, but she could feel the boy's anxiety building with each passing hour. He changed his shirt 3 times, reorganized his bookshelf twice, and kept asking if his hair looked okay. "Daddy's going to be tired," Dylan said as they heard the sound of a car in the driveway. "He's always tired when he comes back from trips." Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "That's okay. You don't have to entertain him. Just be yourself." But as footsteps echoed in the marble foyer below, Sarah realized she was just as nervous as Dylan. Everything she'd heard about Marcus Blackstone suggested a man who was brilliant, demanding, and completely out of his depth when it came to emotional situations. What if he really did see his son as a problem to be solved? What if he decided Sarah's methods were too unconventional, too risky? "Dylan?" Marcus Blackstone's voice carried up the stairs, rich and deep, with just a hint of exhaustion. "Where's my boy?" Dylan shot Sarah a nervous look, then headed for the stairs. She followed at a discreet distance, not wanting to intrude on their reunion, but needing to see how this played out. Marcus Blackstone was not what Sarah had expected. Yes, he was tall and commanding, with the kind of presence that probably made boardrooms fall silent when he entered, but there was something vulnerable in the way he knelt to embrace his son, something almost desperate in how tightly he held Dylan against him. "I missed you," Marcus said quietly, and Sarah heard genuine emotion in those simple words. "I missed you too, Daddy." But guess what? Sarah came back. She promised she would, and she did. Marcus's eyes found Sarah over Dylan's head, and she felt the full force of his attention like a physical weight. His gaze was assessing, intelligent, and completely unreadable. "Sarah," he said, rising to his full height, "I'm Marcus Blackstone. I understand you've been taking care of my son." "Yes, sir, it's been a pleasure." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd called it a pleasure instead of a challenge. "Mrs. Hartford tells me Dylan has been more cooperative than usual." "Dylan's been wonderful," Sarah said, and she meant it. "He's incredibly bright and creative. You should see the fort he built in the family room." "A fort?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "It was architecturally sound," Dylan said proudly. "Sarah said I used excellent spatial reasoning." For a moment, Marcus Blackstone looked lost, as if his son was speaking a foreign language. Sarah realized with a start that this man, who could probably negotiate multi-billion-dollar deals in his sleep, had no idea how to talk to his own child. "Why don't you show him?" Sarah suggested gently. "I'm sure your father would love to see what you built." As Dylan dragged his father toward the family room, chattering excitedly about load-bearing cushions and structural integrity, Sarah caught Mrs. Hartford watching from the kitchen doorway. The older woman's expression was thoughtful, almost hopeful, but Sarah's relief was short-lived. Later that evening, after Dylan had been tucked into bed with promises from his father to hear about every detail of his Singapore trip the next day, Marcus Blackstone knocked on Sarah's door. "Miss Mitchell, could we speak privately?" Sarah's heart sank, but she followed him to his study, a room she'd never been in before, all dark wood and leather chairs and the lingering scent of expensive cigars. The walls were lined with awards and photographs of Marcus with various world leaders and business titans. This was the inner sanctum of a very powerful man, and Sarah felt suddenly acutely aware of how out of place she was in this world. "Please sit," Marcus said, settling behind his massive desk. "I wanted to discuss Dylan's progress." Sarah perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "Of course. Mrs. Hartford tells me you've implemented some unconventional methods." There it was. Sarah lifted her chin. "I believe every child learns differently. Dylan responds well to creative approaches. Finger painting at the breakfast table. Art therapy can be very beneficial for children who have difficulty expressing emotions verbally. Building forts out of antique furniture. Problem-solving exercises that combine engineering concepts with imaginative play." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with those same storm-gray eyes Dylan had inherited. "So you have an answer for everything." "I have a reason for everything," Sarah corrected. "Your son is brilliant, Mr. Blackstone. He just needs to be challenged in ways that engage his creativity along with his intellect." "And you think 7 other highly qualified nannies were wrong to use traditional methods?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I think your son needed something different than what he was getting. And I think the results speak for themselves." "Do they?" Marcus pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "Because according to this report from his school, Dylan has been absent more days than he's been present this semester. His teachers describe him as disruptive and unwilling to follow classroom rules. One of them suggested he might benefit from medication for attention deficit disorder." Sarah's heart pounded. "With respect, sir, Dylan doesn't have ADD. He's bored. And he's been acting out because he's been in emotional pain. Address the pain and the behavior improves." "You're not a doctor, Miss Mitchell. You're not even a trained educator. What makes you think you're qualified to diagnose my son's needs?" The question hung in the air like a slap. Sarah felt all her insecurities rise to the surface. Her lack of formal education, her rural background, the fact that she was just a young woman from Tennessee who'd grown up poor and was trying to make something of herself in a world that seemed determined to remind her she didn't belong. But then she thought about Dylan crying alone in his room. She thought about the way his face lit up when someone actually listened to his ideas. She thought about the promise she'd made to him and to herself. "Because I see him," she said quietly, "not as a problem to be fixed or a diagnosis to be managed, but as a whole person with feelings and needs and incredible potential. Because I've been where he is, feeling like the adults in my life were too busy or too frustrated to really see me. And because in the past 2 weeks, He slept through the night every single night. Which misses. Hartford tells me he hasn't done since his mother left. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. He's been sleeping. Every night. No nightmares, no crying. He's eating better too, and he's been genuinely excited about learning. When was the last time you heard him laugh, Mr. Blackstone? Really laugh, not the angry kind he uses as a weapon, but real joy. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah held her breath. This afternoon, he said finally. When he was showing me his fort. I haven't heard him laugh like that since his mother left, Sarah finished gently. Marcus nodded, and for just a moment he looked less like a business titan and more like a father who was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted quietly. I can manage billion-dollar acquisitions, but I can't figure out how to talk to my own son without feeling like I'm making everything worse. He loves you, Sarah said. He talks about you constantly. He's just afraid that if he's not perfect, you'll leave too. I would never, but he doesn't know that. Not really. Children Dylan's age understand love through consistency and presence. Every time you leave on a business trip, part of him wonders if this time you won't come back. Marcus rubbed his temples like he had a headache. I have responsibilities. The company employs thousands of people. I can't just... I'm not suggesting you abandon your business, Sarah said carefully, but maybe there are ways to help Dylan feel more secure about your relationship. Regular phone calls when you're away. Setting aside specific time that's just for him when you're home. Including him in age-appropriate aspects of your life so he feels like part of your world, not separate from it. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's not impossible either. They sat in silence for several minutes. Sarah could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time, and she found herself thinking about all the other conversations like this one that had probably taken place in this room. Marcus trying to solve his son's pain the same way he solved business problems. With logic and money and expert consultants who gave him reports full of clinical language, but no real understanding. The school wants to meet with me next week, Marcus said finally. About Dylan's behavior and attendance. What are you going to tell them? I don't know. He looked at her with something that might have been hope. What do you think I should tell them? Sarah took a deep breath. This was her chance to prove that her methods worked, that Dylan was more than his behavioral problems, that love and patience could accomplish what medication and rigid discipline couldn't. Tell them you'd like to try a different approach. Give me 1 month to work with Dylan every day, to implement a consistent routine that addresses his emotional needs along with his educational ones. If you don't see dramatic improvement in his behavior both at home and at school, I'll resign and help you find a replacement who's more traditionally qualified. Marcus stared at her. You're willing to stake your job on 1 month? I'm willing to stake my job on Dylan, because I believe in him, and I think it's time someone showed him that his own father believes in him too. For a moment, Sarah thought he was going to refuse. The rational part of his brain was probably calculating risks and weighing her credentials against the magnitude of what she was proposing. But then he surprised her. 1 month, he said. But I have conditions. Sarah's heart leaped. Name them. First, Dylan goes to school every day unless he's genuinely sick. No more creative absences. Agreed. Second, I want weekly reports on his progress, but not clinical evaluations. I want to know what he's learning, what he's excited about, what's working and what isn't. Of course. And third, Marcus hesitated, and Sarah saw vulnerability flicker across his features again. I want to be included. I don't know how to connect with him the way you do, but I want to learn. I want to be part of whatever approach you're taking. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. Mr. Blackstone, nothing would make Dylan happier than having his father more involved in his daily life. Marcus, he said quietly, if we're going to be partners in this, you should call me Marcus. As Sarah headed back to her room that night, she passed Dylan's door and heard something that made her stop. He was talking to someone, having a conversation in hushed, excited tones. She peered through the crack in the door and saw him sitting cross-legged on his bed, holding a framed photograph she'd never seen before. It was a picture of a woman with Dylan's same dark hair and storm-grey eyes, but there was something sharp and restless in her expression that was nothing like Dylan's capacity for joy. Sarah came back just like she promised. Dylan was whispering to the photograph. And Daddy's home too, and he wants to see my fort tomorrow. Maybe if I'm really good, you'll come back too someday. Sarah's heart shattered and mended itself in the space of a single breath. Tomorrow, she would start the most important month of her life. 30 days to prove that Dylan Blackstone wasn't broken or defiant or impossible. 30 days to prove that sometimes love really was enough. But as she finally fell asleep that night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a promise that might be impossible to keep. Because healing a child's heart was one thing. Healing a family torn apart by abandonment and guilt and years of missed connections, that might take more than a month. That might take a miracle. 3 weeks into their agreement, Sarah knew she was losing the battle. Dylan had been perfect, too perfect. He attended school every day without complaint, completed his homework without being asked, and maintained the kind of polite, distant behavior that made Sarah's heart ache. The spark she'd worked so hard to nurture was dimming, replaced by the mechanical compliance of a child who'd learned that love was conditional. Marcus tried, but his efforts felt forced and awkward. He scheduled quality time like business meetings, approaching fatherhood with the same systematic efficiency he used to run his empire. Dylan responded with careful politeness that fooled no one. The breaking point came on a grey Tuesday afternoon when Sarah picked Dylan up from school and found him sitting alone on the playground bench, his usual group of classmates playing nearby without him. "Rough day?" she asked gently as they walked to the car. Dylan shrugged with the studied indifference he'd been perfecting. It was fine. But Sarah had noticed the tear in his shirt and the dirt on his knees. "Dylan, what really happened?" "Nothing. I fell down during recess." It was the first lie he'd ever told her, and it hit Sarah like a physical blow. She pulled the car over and turned to face him. "Talk to me, please." For a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the scared little boy underneath. "Tommy Richardson said his mom told him that my mom left because I was a bad kid. He said that's why all my nannies quit too, because I'm impossible to love." Sarah felt rage course through her veins, not at Dylan, but at the casual cruelty of adults who gossiped without thinking about the children who might overhear. "Dylan, look at me." His storm grey eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Tommy Richardson is wrong. His mother is wrong. You are not impossible to love. You are not responsible for your mother's choices, and you are not responsible for making other people stay. The people who left made their own decisions based on their own problems, not because of anything wrong with you. Then why does it keep happening?" The question broke Sarah's heart because she didn't have a good answer. How did you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes life was unfair, that sometimes good people got hurt through no fault of their own? "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I know that it's not because you're not worthy of love. And I know that the right people, the people who are supposed to be in your life, they stay. They fight for you. They don't give up when things get hard. Like you did, like I did, like your father is trying to do, like Mrs. Hartford does every single day." That evening, Sarah found Marcus in his study, surrounded by reports and laptop screens, looking exhausted in the way that went deeper than simple tiredness. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Marcus looked up, and she saw her own frustration reflected in his eyes. "It's not working, is it?" "No. And I think I know why." Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk, the same one where she'd sat 3 weeks ago and promised she could heal his son in 30 days. Now she felt like a fraud. "We're both trying so hard to be perfect for Dylan that we're not being real. He can sense the performance and it's making him feel like he has to perform too. We've created this artificial environment where everyone is walking on eggshells, and Dylan is suffocating under the pressure to be grateful and easy and lovable." Marcus rubbed his temples. "So what do we do? I don't know how to turn off 20 years of business training and just be a father. We stop trying to manage this like a problem to be solved and start treating it like what it is. A family learning how to heal together. That sounds good in theory, but Marcus," Sarah leaned forward, her voice urgent. "When was the last time you did something spontaneous with Dylan? Something that wasn't scheduled or planned or designed to achieve a specific outcome?" He thought for a moment. "I can't remember. When was the last time you let yourself be imperfect in front of him? Let him see that you don't have all the answers." "That's not," Marcus started, then stopped. "That's not how leadership works. You're not his CEO. You're his father. There's a difference." Before Marcus could respond, they heard it. A crash from upstairs, followed by Dylan's voice raised in anger and frustration. They both bolted from the study, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Dylan's room looked like a tornado had hit it. Books were scattered across the floor. His carefully organized art supplies were strewn everywhere, and he was standing in the middle of the chaos, tears streaming down his face, holding the photograph of his mother. "I hate her," he screamed when he saw them in the doorway. "I hate her for leaving, and I hate her for not coming back, and I hate that everyone thinks it's my fault." Marcus took a step forward, but Sarah caught his arm. This was Dylan's moment, his chance to finally express the rage and pain he'd been swallowing for months. "I tried so hard to be good," Dylan continued, his voice breaking. "I tried to be perfect, so maybe she'd want to come back. And maybe you wouldn't leave too, and maybe Sarah wouldn't get tired of me like everyone else. But I'm tired of being good. I'm tired of pretending everything is okay when it's not." He hurled the photograph across the room, and it shattered against the wall. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He sat down on the floor in the middle of the chaos and started to cry. Not the controlled, dignified tears of a man who'd learned to manage his emotions, but the raw, broken sobs of a father who'd been carrying his own guilt for too long. "I'm tired too," he whispered. "I'm tired of pretending I know what I'm doing. I'm tired of feeling like I failed you and your mother and myself. I'm tired of being afraid that if I'm not perfect, you'll stop loving me the way she did." Dylan stared at his father with wide eyes, and Sarah held her breath. "You think Mom stopped loving you because you weren't perfect?" Marcus looked up at his son, and Sarah saw years of pain and self-doubt in his expression. "I think she stopped loving our life, our family. Maybe if I'd been home more, if I'd paid more attention, but that's what Sarah said about me," Dylan said slowly. "That it wasn't my fault Mom left, that she made her own choice for her own reasons." Father and son looked at each other across the destroyed room, and Sarah saw the moment when they both realized they'd been carrying the same burden of misplaced guilt. "Maybe Sarah's right," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe some people leave because they can't handle love, not because the people who love them aren't good enough." Dylan walked over to his father and settled beside him on the floor, not caring about the mess around them. "Are you going to leave too?" "Never," Marcus said fiercely, pulling his son into his arms. "I will never leave you, Dylan. Not for business, not for fear, not for anything. You are the most important thing in my life, and I'm sorry it took me so long to show you that." Sarah backed quietly out of the room, tears streaming down her own face. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect behavior or scheduled quality time, but honest emotion and shared vulnerability. But her relief was short-lived. The next morning, Mrs. Hartford knocked on Sarah's door with an expression that sent ice through her veins. "Miss Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. She's in the front parlor." Sarah's heart stopped when she saw the woman waiting for her. Even without the family resemblance, she would have known this was Dylan's mother. Victoria Blackstone was beautiful in the way that money and good breeding could create, but there was something cold and restless in her storm-gray eyes that made Sarah instantly protective. "You must be the famous nanny," Victoria said, looking Sarah up and down with the same dismissive assessment Sarah had received from Mrs. Hartford on her first day. "The one who thinks she can fix my broken son." "Dylan isn't broken," Sarah said quietly. Victoria laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Oh, sweet girl, you have no idea what you're dealing with, do you? That child is exactly like his father. Obsessive, demanding, impossible to satisfy. I spent 7 years of my life trying to be enough for them, and it nearly destroyed me." "So you abandoned your son." "I freed myself," Victoria corrected coolly. "And I freed Dylan from a mother who resented him more with every passing day. Trust me, he's better off without me. Let him decide that." "Absolutely not." Victoria's mask of composure slipped for just a moment. "I didn't come back to play happy family. I came to warn you. Marcus is already becoming obsessed with you, just like he was with me. He thinks love means possession, control, making people into what he needs them to be. And when you inevitably disappoint him, because you will, we all do, he'll discard you, just like he did me." Sarah felt like she'd been slapped. "That's not, isn't it? How long before he starts making decisions about your life? How long before he decides your methods need refinement? Your background needs improvement. Your value needs enhancement." Before Sarah could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Dylan appeared in the doorway, and the moment he saw Victoria, his face went completely white. "Mum?" Victoria's carefully constructed composure cracked completely. For just a second, Sarah saw raw pain flash across her features, the look of a woman who'd convinced herself she'd made the right choice and was confronting evidence to the contrary. "Hello, Dylan. You came back." Victoria glanced at Sarah, then back at her son. "I came to see how you were doing." Dylan took a tentative step into the room. He looked smaller somehow, younger, like seeing his mother had stripped away months of growth and confidence. "Are you staying?" he asked quietly. The hope in his voice was devastating, and Sarah saw Victoria flinch as if he'd struck her. "Oh, sweetheart, no. I can't. This isn't my home anymore. I have a new life now in California. I'm getting married in the spring." Sarah watched Dylan absorb this information, saw him process the fact that his mother had moved on, found someone new to love, built a life that had no room for him in it. "Is he nice?" Dylan asked, and the maturity in the question broke Sarah's heart. "Yes," Victoria said softly. "He's very nice." "Do you love him more than you loved me and Daddy?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Sarah saw Victoria struggle with how to answer it. "It's different," she said finally. "Adult love is different from parent love. But you still left us. I left a situation that was making me unhappy. That's not the same as leaving you." "It feels the same." Marcus appeared in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Victoria, I wasn't expecting you." "Hello, Marcus. You look well. What do you want?" Victoria glanced around the room, at Dylan clinging to Sarah's hand, at Marcus's protective stance in the doorway, at the obvious family unit they'd begun to form without her. "I wanted to make sure Dylan was okay. The private investigator mentioned you'd hired another nanny, and I was curious." "The private investigator?" Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. "I like to stay informed about my son's welfare. From 2,000 miles away." "Don't start, Marcus. Not in front of Dylan." But Dylan surprised them all by speaking up. "Why don't you want us anymore?" The question was so simple, so honest, that it cut through all the adult complications and justifications like a blade. Victoria knelt down so she was at Dylan's eye level. "Baby, it's not that I don't want you. It's that I'm not good at being a mother. Some women are natural at it, like Sarah probably is. But I'm not. I tried for 7 years to be something I'm not, and it made me angry and sad all the time. That's not fair to you. But Sarah gets frustrated with me sometimes too, and she doesn't leave." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah is a better person than I am." "No," Dylan said with the devastating honesty of childhood. "Sarah just loves me enough to stay frustrated." The silence that followed was profound. Sarah saw Victoria truly understand, perhaps for the first time, what she'd given up. Not just a child, but the chance to learn what unconditional love actually meant. "I should go," Victoria said, rising to her feet. "Will you come back?" Dylan asked. Victoria hesitated, glancing at Marcus, then at Sarah. "I don't think that's a good idea, sweetheart. You have a family now, a good family. Don't let anyone convince you that you need me to be complete." She kissed the top of Dylan's head, nodded curtly to Marcus, and paused in front of Sarah. "Take care of them," she said quietly. "They need someone who can handle their intensity without losing herself in it. I hope you're stronger than I was." After Victoria left, the three of them sat in the conservatory among the plants she'd once loved, processing what had just happened. Dylan was curled up between Sarah and Marcus on the wicker settee, and for the first time, their little family felt complete instead of fragile. "I used to think she'd come back if I was good enough," Dylan said quietly. "But she's not coming back, is she?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "I don't think she is." "That's okay," Dylan said. And Sarah marveled at the resilience in his voice. "I have you and Sarah now, and Mrs. Hartford, and maybe someday Sarah will marry someone nice, and I'll have more family." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but Marcus surprised her by laughing. "Getting a little ahead of ourselves, aren't we, buddy?" "I'm just saying, it could happen. Sarah's pretty and smart, and she makes the best pancakes in the world. Someone's going to want to marry her eventually." "Dylan," Sarah protested, but she was laughing too. That evening, as Sarah was tucking Dylan into bed, he asked the question she'd been expecting all day. "Are you going to leave now that Mom came and went away again?" Sarah sat on the edge of his bed and took his small hands in hers. "Dylan, your mother's visit doesn't change anything about how I feel about you or about being here. I'm not going anywhere. But your month is up tomorrow. Dad's going to decide if you can stay." Sarah had been trying not to think about that. Tomorrow, Marcus would make his decision about her future, and despite everything that had happened, she still wasn't sure what he would choose. "Whatever your father decides, you and I will always be connected," she promised. "You've become part of my heart, Dylan Blackstone. That doesn't change based on job titles or living arrangements, but I want you to stay forever." "I want that too," Sarah whispered, surprised by how much she meant it. The next morning, Marcus found Sarah in the conservatory, watering Victoria's orchids and trying not to think about packing her bags. He looked nervous, which was unsettling in a man who normally exuded unshakable confidence. "Sarah," he began, then stopped. "I've been thinking about our agreement." Here it comes, Sarah thought. The polite dismissal, the generous severance package, the careful explanation about how she'd done wonderful work, but they needed someone with more traditional credentials. "I know I promised you an answer today about whether I thought your methods were working," Marcus continued, "but I realize I've been asking the wrong question." Sarah braced herself. "The question isn't whether your methods work for Dylan. It's whether you want to stay with us permanently. Not as an employee, but as family." Sarah's heart stopped. "I don't understand." Marcus moved closer, and she could see vulnerability in his storm-gray eyes that matched his son's. "I'm not good at this. At opening up, at being vulnerable, at putting my heart on the line. But watching you with Dylan, seeing how you love him without conditions or expectations, it's changed something in me, made me want to be better. Not just as a father, but as a man. Marcus, I know this is complicated. I know there are power dynamics and practical considerations and 100 reasons why this might not work. But I also know that what we have, the three of us, it's real. It's the first real thing I've felt since Victoria left." Sarah felt tears start to flow. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to give us a chance to become the family we've been pretending to be for the past month. I'm asking you to let me court you properly, to build something together that's based on love instead of contracts and expectations." "And Dylan?" Marcus smiled. "Dylan's been planning our wedding since yesterday. He's already chosen the flowers and decided that Mrs. Hartford should make the cake." Sarah laughed through her tears. "He's getting ahead of himself. Maybe. But he's also not wrong. I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I love your patience and your wisdom and your ability to see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves. I love the way you make Dylan laugh and the way you make me want to be worthy of both of you." Sarah looked around the conservatory, at the plants Victoria had abandoned, at the home Marcus had built but never really lived in, at the life they'd all been constructing together without quite realizing it. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, yes, I'll give us a chance. Yes, I want to build a family with you and Dylan. Yes, I love you too, even though it terrifies me." Marcus pulled her into his arms then, and as he kissed her among the orchids and ferns, Sarah heard the sound of small feet running down the hallway and Dylan's excited voice calling for Mrs. Hartford. She said, "Yes, Mrs. Hartford." Sarah said, "Yes. We're going to be a real family." 6 months later, Sarah stood in that same conservatory, wearing her grandmother's vintage lace dress, surrounded by Dylan's carefully chosen flowers, watching Mrs. Hartford fuss over a 3-tiered cake that was probably too elaborate for a simple family ceremony. Marcus waited at an improvised altar made of garden trellises, looking nervous and happy and completely different from the distant business mogul she'd first met. But it was Dylan who stole the show, walking down the makeshift aisle with the rings tied to a satin pillow, grinning so wide Sarah thought his face might split in half. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Dylan interrupted. "Wait, I want to say something first." The small gathered crowd, Sarah's family from Tennessee, Marcus's business associates, Mrs. Hartford, and the household staff, turned to look at him expectantly. "I just want everyone to know that Sarah kept her promise," Dylan announced solemnly. "She said she would come back and she did. She said she wouldn't leave, and she didn't. She said some people stay when they love you, and she was right. He looked directly at Sarah then, and she saw in his storm-grey eyes all the healing they'd done together, all the love they'd discovered, all the family they'd built from the pieces of their broken hearts. "Sarah taught me that love isn't about being perfect," Dylan continued. "It's about staying even when things get hard. And I want everyone to know that I'm going to love her and my dad forever and ever, and we're never going to leave each other again." There wasn't a dry eye in the conservatory. As Sarah and Marcus exchanged vows among Victoria's abandoned orchids, now thriving under Sarah's care, she thought about the scared young woman who'd arrived at this mansion 8 months ago with nothing but hope and determination. She'd come here to save a job, but she'd found something infinitely more precious. She'd found home. And as Dylan threw flower petals with abandon while Mrs. Hartford tried unsuccessfully to maintain dignity while wiping away tears, Sarah Mitchell Blackstone realized that sometimes the most broken families are the ones most capable of healing. Sometimes love really is enough. Sometimes promises really can be kept. And sometimes the people who need saving the most are the ones brave enough to open their hearts to a scared young woman from Tennessee who believes in the power of unconditional love. The nanny who changed everything had become the wife and mother who would love them forever, and they all lived gratefully ever after.